This is a story called The Vase by bobwoofix, under the subreddit Short Stories. The Maker. A small flame sparked into life as a match was struck across a rough-hewn stone wall. The workroom of the old wizard began to reveal itself as he lit the many half-melted candles dotted around the room. The centerpiece was a finely inlaid wooden table on which was strewn an array of scrolls, writing implements, and oddly shaped devices crafted from wood and various types and hues of metal. The back wall of the chamber was dominated by an enormous stone fireplace. It housed a large cauldron hanging from a cast-iron stand, below which was the remnants of yesterday's fire. There were no windows within this chamber, as it was buried far beneath a towering castle, surrounded by a moat bordering lush green fields that stretched out to the edge of a distant forest, beyond which rose snow-capped mountains. A small knock at the heavy metal-banded oaken door, opposite the fireplace, brought a smile to the wizard's weathered face. He quickly moved to open it, and greeted the small girl standing in the passageway, struggling under the weight of a large bucket of water. "Moin," the young girl nodded politely to the old man, as she shuffled quickly forward to put the bucket down next to the fireplace. "You are just in time, Beatrix. Today we forged the vase Gefäß des Lebens." This brought a smile to the small girl's face, but she saw in the old man a whisper of sadness behind his resolute smile. Even though she had been waiting eagerly for this day since the tragedy of almost a year ago, she still felt a shiver of fear pass through her. "The hare. You simply cannot drag a war horse around by its bit, young master," exclaimed the old teacher to his young charge, who was struggling atop a large, powerful, and stubborn black stallion. "Use your knees, boy. When a sword is in your hand and the battle rages, you won't have want of reins anyway, and lucky for you, Engel knows it." The boy then let the reins loosen slightly and skillfully guided the horse with a subtle pressure of his knees, turning him from the practice yard into the wide-open fields. He let out a shout as the horse sped off in a graceful, lightning-fast, thundering canter towards the towering trees of the distant forest. The large pitch-black stallion was the king's own treasured war-horse. Known by the king's foes as Drunkler Engel, he was fast and, in the heat of battle, just as deadly to the king's foes as the fully armored and trained warrior who rode atop him. Today was the first time that the king's son and heir had been given to ride him. Under the tutelage of the old general, who had also trained the king in his youth, he had quickly subdued the impressive, headstrong stallion and was now testing his fearsome speed in an open canter. Monty was a tall, powerful young man. His long, dark blonde hair was swept back in the wind, as was his shirt, revealing his finely muscled torso. His strength of character and intelligence shone out of his bright blue eyes as he held the sight of the distant forest in his gaze. Suddenly he detected a movement amongst the trees, then the glimmer of steel. In less than a heartbeat, an army surged towards him from out of the undergrowth. Engel reacted even before he could, spinning him around, away from the threat and back towards the safety of the castle. The battle-hardened horse knew this young charge was not armed, and that his true master was not on his back. The great horse's speed increased even beyond Monty's wildest expectations as they sped away from the charging horde. As they rode, Monty could hear the trumpet sound from the castle's tallest tower, signaling an impending attack. He saw the old general riding out to meet him, carrying in his hand his large double-edged broadsword. The general's fierce look told Monty all he needed to know as they both raced back towards the castle gates. He could tell by the color of the flags that the armored horsemen thundering up behind them were led by Odeacer, the leader of a brutal Gothic tribe that had been rumored to have sacked a number of towns far to the south of them. On their long pikes were the heads of the king's scouts, which was why they had no advanced warning of their approach. Just as they reached a bridge crossing the moat and were in the sight of safety, a heavy arrow slammed into Monty's back, throwing him forward off his mount. The last thing he saw was the heavy beams of the moat bridge as they raced up to meet him. The Prophecy. As the wind and the rain raged outside, a booming knock echoed throughout the castle. On the king's instruction, the gates were hurriedly opened to a black-hooded, wizened old hag clutching a tall staff in her right hand and a large cloth bag in her left. None of the soldiers and king's staff who met her would look her into the eyes, as they quickly led her to the queen's chamber. As they approached the door, they could hear the cries of the queen in the last throes of labor. To their relief, the old hag waved them away as she threw open the door and strode into the room. The hag quickly shooed away the queen's attendants and then slammed the door shut behind them. To the nervous attendants waiting just outside the door, it seemed like an eternity before the scream ceased and the cry of a small child was heard. One of them quickly rushed off to summon the king, while the rest waited impatiently for the door to be opened to them. By the time the king had arrived, a crowd had gathered outside the queen's chambers, waiting to hear the news of the birth. The talking and murmurs quickly increased as the king strode up to the door. He turned to those waiting, and his stern look sent them scurrying back from the door to a respectful distance. He then took a deep breath and strode inside. In the arms of the hag was a small child wrapped tightly in cloth. The look on the hag's face said it all. He quickly went to his wife's side as she lay drenched in sweat and her own blood. Her face was serene as she looked into her husband's eyes. Just before her life faded completely away, she whispered into his ear. The king bent forward and kissed his wife on her forehead while choking back his grief. He then slowly stood and went to their child. Taking him into his arms, he raised him above his head and proclaimed in a loud voice, "Today, as prophesied by your mother with her dying breath, I say to you, my son, and to all who hear, that you are a man of power. Henceforth you should be called Monty, which is man-power. Though evil may befall you, none will conquer your spirit. Indeed, though your life may be forged in a fragile vessel, it will transcend time and endure forever, protected by those you love and who love you." The Vase. Reaching into a golden cage, the wizard gently took the two small birds inside and brought them across to the cauldron. Whispering an incantation, he thrust his hands and the small birds into the molten liquid. Mere moments later, he drew forth a beautiful vase that was shaped with the delicate curves of a woman. On the vase were the two small birds perched on a flowering branch. This pattern was repeated on both sides and laid over top of a skin-colored milky hue. Beatrix swore later that she saw the birds move and settle onto the branch, turning to each other in song. The twig also bent slightly as it took their weight, and the flowers blossomed to life. The vase was light and delicate, with not a flaw or mark on it. Nothing about it spoke of the deep secret it held, the soul of the boy it contained, and the wonder of its making. It was not what the king had hoped for, a return of his son. Nonetheless, it was as the wizard had predicted, and spoken often of, a vessel of life. It carried the child's prophecy with it, and, as the old hag had proclaimed, some day it would find its namesake to pass on the boy's spirit, intelligence, graciousness, and strength. It would be possessed by a gentle boy, and one day be protected by those you love and who love you. Great joy resounded throughout the kingdom when the vase, known as Gefäß des Lebens, was presented to the king. All proclaimed that it would herald the return of the king's strength, as well as the glory of the kingdom. The king treasured Gefäß des Lebens and placed it inside a glass case beside his throne. Indeed, with it always in his sight, the king did return to his strength, and in time restored his kingdom for the sake of his son. However, as the years became decades and the decades turned into centuries, the story of the vase disappeared into history. Facts became myths and myths turned into legends. Gefäß des Lebens became lost in wars and passed from hand to hand. Eventually it was considered to be but a simple trinket. It crossed continents and oceans and ended up being taken by a young man who dealt with all manner of history's flotsam and jetsam. However, there was something about this simple vase that intrigued him. As he took it from its box and unwrapped it, he swore he saw a flicker of movement in the bird's wings. He heard a faint bird song and a sigh of a branch relaxing into place. He was so taken by the vase that he put it into the front window of his small shop. It even took pride of place, ahead of many more illustrious antiques. As the years passed by, the young man grew older, and no one but he saw the treasure in that simple vase. So there it sat, year after year, in its pride of place, in his front window, ignored by all. The boy. The bell above the door rung as it was hesitantly pushed open by a young boy. He looked around and saw an old man seated quietly at the back of the shop, unpacking some old, once-loved, yet all but forgotten treasures. He quickly glanced in the front window before going up to the old man. "Excuse me, sir, how much is that vase that you have in your window?" The old man was taken aback by the question. In all his years of owning the vase, no one had ever asked after it. He now felt quite reluctant to part with it. What makes you think you could afford such a wonder, young man?" "Oh, well, I'm not sure I can, but I would like to know how much it is, so I can save up to buy it, if that is possible." This made the old man smile. Here was a boy just as much in love with the old vase as he was. After all these years, maybe he could be persuaded to part with it, if the young man proved worthy. So he gave the boy a price that he knew he couldn't afford, to see how he would react. To his surprise, the lad's face grew a smile, and he nearly skipped out of the shop, promising to return when he had the money. The first time the boy saw the vase, he swore that the birds opened their wings, lifted their heads, and sung the most beautiful melody. The branch had waved, as if to him, and he could smell the rich fragrance of the flowers in full bloom beckoning to him. Every day he passed by, the boy had grown more and more fascinated by the simple vase in the front window of the old man's shop. One day he plucked up enough courage to go in and ask about it. He was certain that the vase was not for sale, as there was no price displayed on it. But now he had its price. He knew that it was only a matter of time until it was his. The young man came back often to make sure his vase had not sold, and eventually he and the old man had formed a friendship. Suddenly, out of the blue, the old man decided to auction off the vase in a raffle. He said it was a way to promote his business. This both excited and saddened the young man, for while he could afford the price of a ticket, he knew he had little chance of winning the raffle. As the days went by and the number of tickets being sold increased, the boy began to become quite despondent. He knew that the vase would go to some other lucky winner. After all, he had never won anything in his life. When the day of the draw came, he almost refused to go. However, his mother had insisted, so he dragged himself out of bed and made his way into town. By the time he had arrived at the store, a crowd had gathered and the old man was standing up to make a speech. Standing at the back of the crowd, the young man did not see that the old man had seen him. After a quick speech, the old man reached into a large hat and drew out a single name. The boy looked down as his eyes almost filled with tears, for he knew he must have lost his precious vase forever. Then everyone was cheering and slapping him on the back. "Monty, you have won!" they yelled. Thus, with that proclamation, the vase was his. He was almost scared to hold it the first time for fear of breaking it. It took him weeks to realize that it hadn't all just been a dream, and he did indeed own the precious vase. Something about this simple vase resonated with him. He felt that it had brought him luck. Along with the vase came a renewed confidence. He almost felt that there was nothing he could not do. Indeed, over time the boy grew into a man and traveled the world. His wits, graciousness, and intelligence took him to great heights in many illustrious careers, the vase always with him. That was a story called The Vase by bobwoofix under the subreddit Short Stories. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you next time.